thank you guys all for coming. I appreciate everyone coming out here tonight. This is an amazing turnout. Hopefully, a lot of you learn a lot about dating and have met some really cool people here. And it's been pretty cold out, so I appreciate everyone coming. All right, we'll just jump right in since there's so much to do and it's kind of a crazy crowd. So if you want to find out about future events, you can go to DeSci.NYC on Twitter. So you can take out your phone and follow it. You guys got to take out your phone. Come on, you can do it. Does anyone here know what decentralized science is? Are you guys on Twitter and have you seen it popping off recently? No. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Good. Somebody. Is that an actual yeah?
I come to these events.
Okay, yes, okay, good. We need an authentic yeah. And, what is it? So we'll talk about it in a second. But decentralized science is how you can do science. So we have science, science isn't accelerating as quickly as it could or as accurate as it could be. And people have thought, if you could decentralize it and remove it from academia, if you could try and not just have it done in universities or in research labs, but sort of anyone could participate in science and anyone could be incentivized to do science, you could have a lot more innovation that happens. Imagine before GitHub existed or everyone was sort of a professional programmer, and then you realize that oh my God, there's so much more talent that exists within the world. Okay, so these are the next talks we have coming up. So we have one on publishing in academia. So Dr. Mu Yang is an amazing person. She found out at the National Institute of Aging was fuzzing some of their data, and she was the person that actually figured it out initially. So if you want, that one's going to be next week, 7 days from now. And if you want to RSVP, here's the QR code to do that. Cool. Then we have, who here is into supplements or longevity or Brian Johnson? And there's so many different options of people that want to, there's so many different options, right? And this guy, Dr. Kirtan Parekh, is an expert in longevity medicine. And you're going to be in frame. You have to, it's going to be in the camera. And so, go back. I looked at the frame. Always stand up and go back. Okay, so he's an expert in longevity medicine. He's sold a company on supplements, and he's really, really interesting. So if you want to RSVP, that one's going to be this February 16th, which is the day after the longevity summit that Brian Johnson is hosting. So if you're coming to that, the next day we're going to have a big event with a lot of people there. So you guys can be the next ones on that. And then, how many people have ever dreamt of swimming in the Hudson River? Okay, a lot of people. So there's this project called the Billion Oyster Project, and what they are doing is they are trying to clean up large bodyways of water and basically make it so that you can swim there. And they figured out that oysters are great filter feeders and can basically detoxify a lot of the water, and also are carbon sequesterers. So you can basically, they take a lot of carbon out of the water and out of the air and sequester it in their shells, and when they die, it sort of keeps it all wrapped up nicely. So that's cool. And if you want to RSVP, that's there on March 4th. Okay, if you guys are excited about science, I started a company, which we'll talk about, but one of the reasons we host this event, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Binance, Solana, Movement, and Base. They're all very nice chains that sponsor DeSci NYC, so give them a round of applause. And so if you want to trade shitcoins, you can do so on any of those chains. But that's just right now. So, but also we started a company called Stadium Science, and we're looking to hire. We're hiring for programmers or project managers and stuff like that. And how many people are here familiar with Polymarket? Polymarket, yeah. And you could bet on political things. That's cool, right? But what if you could bet on science? That's what that is about. So I'll give you a quick, brief overview of that. So the old way of doing science was doing it in universities. and relying on experts in nature or in universities. And the new way of doing, and we saw in the election this time around, the old way of doing elections was with Fox News and CNN, and they have the pundits who are very excited about whatever they're talking about. But then what people were actually doing is they were going to Polymarket and saying there's actually we can get insight into who's going to win the election because people are incentivized to talk to their neighbor or come up with new methods of validating the data. And so what we're trying to do with Stadium Science is come up with a new way of validating science. And so instead of relying on the experts who are in nature or in universities, you can rely on prediction markets, and you can solve those prediction markets with data. So you can actually make money by doing science. And so the idea is to make science profitable, and so people who make accurate predictions will make money off of it. So we have a lot of different, we get data from a lot of different sources. So we get it from wearables or we get it from labs. And we try and gamify it. So some of the competitions right now, we're doing competitions on intermittent fasting. So people are not sleeping or not eating for a little bit, and then we're tracking how it affects their sleep. We're doing a thing on hair with HairDAO on hair racing, where you can accelerate hair with different types of drugs. We're doing one on sperm racing, where people can submit samples and go to a lab like LabCorp and see who has the fastest sperm. But this is something that Brian Johnson is really into, is sort of gamifying health and saying that there's things you can do to affect your health, and then we add a way for people to compete on it. We're also doing things with how vitamin C affects sleep, but these are sort of the intro things, the projects that we're working on, and creating markets for each of these. So we have prediction markets on who's going to sleep the most, from you can people that wear an Oura ring. If you want to sign up, you can contribute your data, and then you can allow people to bet on you, and you get if you contribute the data, you actually earn money through getting a portion of the trading fees that we generate. So if you don't want to compete, if you don't want to submit your data though, you can also bet on other people's data. So you don't. Everyone doesn't have to be a lab mouse. Some people can be the other people that are in charge. That's about it. So this is DeSci NYC. We've had a lot of speakers. I don't want to be up here forever, so I'm going to give it over to our next speaker. Does anyone have any questions on DeSci? What DeSci is, or on Stadium Science?
How do we give our data to it?
Oh, go to stadium.science, and you can sign up for the website.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We're hiring also if you want to help build this product. Cool. All right. Let's open another window in the back. It's kind of hot. So this is Dan, Dr. Dan. I don't know. Oh, and also you guys, we did this thing. If anyone is wearing black, you should mingle with each other, and because you all are desperate, and so you guys should talk once we're done here. I wanted to make that announcement, so in case you didn't know. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to give you Dan. Dan is an expert. Let me change the slides here. So what I really liked about Dan is, Dan, I've had this, obviously Hinge and Tinder, they just are sort of random algorithms, and the future is obviously in having a more in-depth profile on people and allowing for AI to match people based on their psychological profile. And Dan had built something like this. So without further ado, Dan.
So before I jump in, I wanted to do a quick poll of the audience about a question that I'm interested in, but the question requires a little bit of setup here. So this is a chart from a 2019 paper. It's showing the changing ways that people have met, changing ways that couples have met from 1940 to 2019 when the paper was published. And so it's a little blurry here, but if you look at the blue line, that's the percentage of couples that have met through friends. This black line here, that's the percentage of couples that have met through family. This line right here is the percentage of couples that have met in primary or secondary school. And of course, the big story over the past 2 decades is this red line that's going up and to the right over here, which is the percentage of couples that have met online or through dating apps. And it overtakes every other means by which people have met, starting in like 2015 or so. And so the question that I'm curious about, and I don't know if you guys can see this, is this purple line that I'm adding to the very bottom of this chart here, which is the percentage of couples that have had arranged marriages via AI. So obviously right now, obviously, as far as I'm aware, this is 0%. I'm not aware of any couples that have had arranged marriages via AI. But my question here is, it's 2025 right now. Within the next 20 years, by 2045, will that purple line that I just showed, will it overtake all the other lines? Will the majority of new marriages be arranged by AI? So just by a show of hands, how many people think a majority of marriages will be arranged by AI? Don't be shy. Okay, I'm going to call that maybe 10%. Let's leave questions for the end. There's some ambiguity there, but just take it as given here. Okay, so just for some context for why I'm giving this talk. So in 2021 and 2022, I was running a dating service, and I ended up organizing nearly 3,000 in-person dates. I was running speed dating events, not for the sake of running speed dating events per se. It wasn't an end in and of itself, but it was a means to rapidly collect real-world training data. And I was training romantic compatibility models off of this, and then I built an automated matchmaking system. And so this talk is structured in 4 main parts. In the first part, I'll talk about how you can use speed dating events to rapidly collect real-world training data. Then I'll talk about some interesting insights into the data. I'll talk about attractiveness, how much do looks actually matter. We'll go into some political and religious and ethnicity data. Then I'll talk about if it's possible to train machine learning models to predict the compatibility between a man and a woman before they've even met. And finally, I'll talk about this automated matchmaking system I built. And at the very end, I'm happy to answer any questions. And also, I've open sourced all of the anonymized data that I collected. So I'll share links to that and all the writing from the stuff that I've published online as well. Okay, so first up, how...
Is there someone who's by the lights that can turn the lights off? No? Does anyone buy a light switch? Oh, that's turn do the opposite, Keep some of the lights on the back, yeah. And can someone let someone in at the door? There's the pizza there. Is it not pizza? Like the first thing. Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Okay, cool. So first section here is how you might use speed dating events to rapidly collect real-world training data. So this is a picture from a speed dating event that I ran at a brewery in Austin, Texas. And for people that are unfamiliar with what the format is, generally speaking, for heterosexual speed dating events, women are typically seated at one spot throughout the duration of the event. The event might last like an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then men are initially assigned a starting position, but then while running these events, I would walk around with a bell, and every 8 or 9 minutes, I would ring the bell, and the men would know to rotate up one seat. And so by the end of the event, everyone gets a chance to meet each other. All of the logistics and the data collection was done through mobile apps that I built. So people would download an iOS or Android app. They would create their account. They would fill out their profile. They'd be able to browse events, speed dating events in their area that I was running, find out details about those events, purchase tickets. And then after the event was over, they would be swiping left and right on the people they talked to kind of denote whether or not they liked the person that they spoke to. And if both people liked each other, I would share contact details in the app, and they could take it from there. So I was experimenting with running speed dating events of different sizes and different age groups. And I found that in terms of attendance, that 20-person mark was kind of the Goldilocks zone in terms of attendance. I found that if you run events that are much larger than this in size, if you go up to 30 or 40 people, the big downside here is that it starts to get a little bit overwhelming. You can imagine if you're going on these speed dates with like 15 or 20 people back to back to back, it kind of gets draining unless you're super extroverted. So that's the big downside there. If the event is much smaller in size, if it's say like 10 people, then the big downside is you're not super likely to meet someone that you're compatible with. So 20-person events are kind of the Goldilocks zone here. And I was running heterosexual events. Average size was 20, and I made sure to take the gender ratio very seriously. So the average gender ratio was split evenly between men and women, 10 and 10. And the way that I maintain this even gender ratio for every event is by manipulating ticket prices and ad spend. So the average ticket price for one of these speed dating events, at least in Texas, was $25, but there was a big range there. So in some cases, I'm giving away tickets for free. In other cases, I'm selling tickets as high as $41, and that just depends on the gender ratio. So as a general rule of thumb, for the speed dating events that I ran for older age groups, it was generally speaking easier to sell tickets to women, much more difficult to sell tickets to men. And for younger age group, let's say for people in their 20s, it was easier to sell tickets to men, more difficult to sell tickets to women. There were two types of data that I was collecting from each event. So the first type of data is the outcome of every date. And the second type of data are the attributes and preferences of each participant. So let's talk about the outcomes first. So speed dating has this advantage, which is that with a comparatively small amount of people, you can actually get a large amount of real world data. So again, average size of these events is 20 people, evenly split between men and women. And even with just 20 people, you actually, at the end of the event, get to observe the outcomes of 100 possible relationships, right? Because everyone meets each other. And this is what the data of the outcomes look like from each of these events. Pretty straightforward. Every row here represents a date. So for example, if we look at the first row, guy A is going on a date with woman D. He did not like her, she liked him, so there was no mutual interest. As opposed to this last date here, C and G are going on a date. They both like each other, which means there is mutual interest, which means contact information is going to be shared in the app. The second type of data I was collecting was the attributes and preferences of everyone who was in attendance. And there were kind of two flavors of this. The first type of data that I was collecting about each guest was this 100-question compatibility survey. And I'll go into more detail into this in a second, but it basically covered your personality traits, your intelligence, your identity, questions around health and lifestyle, and a bunch of miscellaneous questions as well. And the important thing to note here is that this was actually a requirement to purchase a ticket. So when people are in the app browsing for different speed dating events, I didn't allow anybody to just purchase a ticket. The purchase was gated upon successful completion of this compatibility survey. And then the second type of data that I was trying to collect on each person in attendance was a rating of their physical attractiveness. And basically the gist here is people would upload pictures and then I would get them rated by opposite sex, like independent. I would get independent ratings by the opposite sex to get ratings for physical attractiveness. And I'll talk about this in more detail in a second too. But first I'll talk about this compatibility survey. So one thing that I was trying to get a sense of is your personality. And I was using this 5-factor model of personality from like a Psych 101 class. And so there are 5 factors here. One of them is openness to experience. This is a measure of like your curiosity, creativity, preference for novelty and variety. Conscientiousness is this tendency to be organized, dependable, self-disciplined. Extroversion, most people are familiar with. Agreeableness is this concern for social harmony, tendency to get along with others, compromise. And neuroticism, it says emotional stability here. It's actually the inverse of emotional stability. It's this tendency to feel negative emotions like anxiety or depression. So this is a screenshot from the app. This is actually a little bit outdated. It was before I whittled down the survey to 100 questions. It used to be a little bit more. But this question was trying to get at this openness to experience factor of personality. So a good percentage of the 100 questions on this survey were dedicated to personality traits. The second type of data that I was trying to get in this compatible, so I was trying to get a sense of people's intelligence, and it turns out that depending on the study that you look at, SAT scores correlate really well with general measures of IQ, somewhere in the range of 0.7 to 0.9. So basically what I did is find super old, like 20-year-old SAT exams, took a bunch of random questions. This is not literally one that was on there, but some of the questions were literally SAT questions. Bunch of other things in the survey, questions around identity, so how users identify in key areas of their lives, including political beliefs, religious affiliations and ethnic backgrounds. It also assessed how much these factors mattered in their romantic and social relationships. So for example, I asked questions like, how important is it that your romantic partner shares your religious beliefs? How comfortable are you being friends with someone that disagrees with you on important political topics? There are a lot of questions around health and lifestyle, like alcohol consumption, drug use, exercise habits, and a bunch of miscellaneous questions around your income, height, age, location, and how many children you want, and so on and so forth. So that's the 100-question compatibility survey. The second type of data I was trying to get a sense of is how attractive you are physically. And so people would upload a picture of themselves in the app, and then I would recruit opposite sex workers from this service called Prolific to rate their pictures. And the goal being to get at least 10 independent ratings of attractiveness for each person in order to get an average. And for those people that don't know, Prolific is kind of similar to Mechanical Turk. People use it in academic settings, as far as I'm aware. And you can kind of get people to complete tasks for you from like vetted and customizable demographic groups. So I had a good experience working with them, and I'd recommend working with them if you need something like this. So the people that were rating the pictures were directed to this little hacky tool that I built, where you would rate people's pictures. So in this case, we're rating Elmo's pictures. The instructions here are pretty straightforward. Please rate the physical attractiveness of the person in the picture on a 1 through 10 scale, with 1 being least attractive, 5 being average, and 10 being most attractive. So once you've got all this data, you've got the physical attractiveness data, and you've got the responses to the compatibility surveys. These were distilled into a comprehensive set of user attributes and preferences. And an example of this is on the right here. This is like a set of user features. So for example, you've got information like the user's age, who they're attracted to, what percentage of those SAT questions they get correct, scores on personality, their agreeableness, conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism, openness, what was their average physical attractiveness rating, how tall are they, how much money do they make, what's their ethnicity, religion, politics, how much like their drug use, and so on and so forth. So that's a little bit about how you might use speed dating to rapidly collect real-world training data. Now I'll talk a little bit about some cool insights into this data, and I'll give hopefully this is not necessary, I'll give some disclaimers, a little preamble here. Some people get a little bit sensitive about this data. I'm about to make some generalizations about groups. I'm about to talk about group averages. That misses a lot of nuance, obviously. It's a generalization, there's exceptions to the rule. And obviously, knowing something about a group average has no bearing or implication on any individual person. Okay, so let's talk about physical attractiveness. Okay, so this is a distribution of women's physical attractiveness in the eyes of men. And what you'll notice here is that it's a pretty normal looking distribution. It looks kind of like a bell curve where in the eyes of men, most women are kind of average looking. The bulk of women are kind of in the middle. Very few women that are incredibly attractive, very few women that are incredibly unattractive. And so actually the median rating of women by men is right down the middle, is a 5.0 out of 10. So takeaway here, men perceive the median woman to be average looking. Let's look at the same same data, same chart, I should say, but this time of men's physical attractiveness ratings in the eyes of women. And what you'll see here is it's a left skewed distribution. The majority of men are below average looking in the eyes of women. And in fact, women rate 72% of men as below average in physical attractiveness. So this difference this is the same exact data that I just showed. It's just easier to see the difference on the same axes. And so I've written a little bit about this online, and there's often certain comments I hear like, women are unfairly judging men's attractiveness, or women should be grading men on a normal distribution just like men do for women. And I think that's not necessarily the right takeaway here. There's no law of nature that says everything must be normally distributed. There's many examples in nature of things that are not normally distributed. And I think there's good evolutionary reasons for why women might have a higher threshold for attractiveness. And it basically comes down to this idea that sperm is cheap, but eggs are expensive. So yeah, I think there might be some good reasons for why women might be a little bit pickier in certain contexts on average. Okay, so men are less attractive than women on average, but how much does this actually matter in dating? How much do looks matter? So looks matter for everyone, and this data here is I basically took men and women and I grouped them into 4 buckets. From least attractive to most attractive quartiles, right? Least attractive, second quartile, third quartile, most attractive for both men and women. That's on the x-axis. And on the y-axis, you're seeing the fraction of the opposite sex that liked them at a speed dating event. So after having an 8-minute long in-person date. And so what you see here is this up and to the right relationship, which suggests that the more attractive you are, the more the opposite sex is going to like you after a short date. So perhaps unsurprising for both men and women, you see this up and to the right relationship. Looks matter for men and for women. But if you look at the slopes here, looks matter more for women than men. And you can see this by comparing the difference between the least attractive and the most attractive quartiles. So there's a 50 percentage point jump in likability between the least attractive and most attractive quartiles for women. Whereas for men, this increase in likability exists, it's positive, but it's less than half. It's only 21 percentage points. So looks matter for everyone, but at least in a dating context, they matter more for women than for men. What's the relationship between age and attractiveness? Perhaps unsurprisingly, older people are less attractive on average. So on the x-axis here, it's men and women broken up by decade, 20s, 30s, and 40s. And on the y-axis here, you've got their physical attractiveness ratings. And as opposed to the up and to the right relationship we were looking at for the previous charts, in this case, we see a down and to the right relationship, which suggests that as people get older, they're less attractive. And this is the case for both women and men. But again, if we look at the slopes here, there's a difference. The decline in physical attractiveness for women in their 20s to their 40s is 1.2 points in attractiveness, whereas for men, it's only half a point. So older people are less attractive, but the decline is steeper for women. Okay, let's talk about politics, religion, and ethnicity. So one question I was asking on the compatibility survey is, how important is your partner's politics, religion, or ethnicity? And the possible answers you could give ranged from not important at all to very important. And so this chart is showing you the percentage of people that said it was somewhat or very important how important their partner's politics, religion, or ethnicity were. And the percentage of people that's saying it was somewhat or very important. So if you look at the politics line here, something like 70% of people are saying that's important to them, versus ethnicity is like 30%. So I thought this was interesting because I feel like if you were to ask this question 100 years ago, you would get a very different ordering of these results. If we look at the same exact kind of chart here, but this time broken up by gender, what we see here is that in each case, for politics, religion, and ethnicity, women care more than men about their partner. And so I think this goes back again to, in certain contexts, women are a little bit pickier. Okay, a few rapid fire charts on sex, drugs, and spirituality. Women are less interested in casual sex, perhaps unsurprising. Men are more likely to use drugs. This one was interesting. Women are 8 times more likely to be bisexual. And this is interesting. If you ask 4 different people who say they're spiritual, what they mean by that, it's a kind of a wishy-washy, vague term. I never know what anyone means when they say they're spiritual. In some contexts, I might even say that I'm spiritual. But what's clear in the data is that spiritual people seem to use marijuana more and have more sexual partners. And then last thing here, there's a little tool that I built, which is available at datefilters.com, and I'll share a link to this at the end of the talk as well. But this is a tool that shows you what percent of singles, at least according to my data set, have the traits you might care about. So you can filter, you can switch this between men and women, and you can filter the population of single men or single women by any criteria you care about. So if you want to find that 6'5" guy with blue eyes and in finance, you might try this out. Okay, so that's some insights into the data that I collected. Now let's talk about whether or not it's possible to train machine learning models to predict the romantic compatibility between a man and women before they've even met. Or to state this a little bit more concretely, so given all these user features, given everything you know about the man and woman, given what you know about their personality, their IQ, their physical attractiveness rating, and so on and so forth, can you use this data, can you use these features to predict some of these outcomes of these dates? And so there's different outcomes you could think about predicting. I was most interested in the mutual interest outcome, which means whether both the man and the woman liked each other after that first date. So there's this concept in evolutionary psychology called assortative mating. And assortative mating basically is this idea that birds of a feather flock together. And I stole Wikipedia's description of this here. So it says, human mating is inherently non-random. Despite the common trope, opposites attract, humans generally prefer mates who share the same or similar traits. And I think most people have like an intuition around this. So it tends to be the case that attractive people tend to date other attractive people. Smart people tend to date other smart people. But this extends to many more dimensions beyond that. And so in order to try to capture this in the model, in addition to the individual traits for the man and the woman, I also introduced these assortative mating features, which captured the similarity or dissimilarity between the man and the woman. So for example, you have the man's average physical attractiveness rating, you have the woman's average physical attractiveness rating, and you can compute the difference here, and you have this average physical attractiveness rating Diff, where Diff stands for difference. And you can do this for IQ and height and so on and so forth. This is what the training and test data set look like. So every row here represents a date, and then you've got the individual features for both the man and the woman, as well as the assortative mating features, the differences between the woman and man's age, IQ, personality, and so on and so forth. And then finally on the very right, you've got that target variable, that variable that you're trying to predict. In this case, it's mutual interest, whether both the man and the woman ended up liking each other. And so the way that this typically works is when you're training a model, you randomly split this data set into two groups, a training set and a testing set. And while training the model, it has visibility into the outcomes. It can see what happened on that date, and it's learning from that data. When you're evaluating the model, you want to see how accurate it is. You hide that from the model. And instead, you ask the model to make predictions as to what it thinks is going to happen. In this case, it spits out probabilities for mutual interest, this P mutual interest column. So as an example, this first row, a date between A and B, the model says very high likelihood, a 73% chance in this toy example, that they're going to find each other interesting and want to meet for a second date. Whereas in the second example, between C and D, very low probability. They're probably not going to get along. So the analogy here is kind of to like a student studying for an exam. When they're doing homework problems, they can look at the back of the book. They can see, did I do this homework problem right? They can look at the answer key. When you want to evaluate the student's knowledge, when you want to see if they absorb the material, you have them take an exam. And obviously during the exam, they can't look at the answer key. But you can evaluate that exam later on by comparing what answers they got right or wrong. Okay, so how well does this compatibility model do? So this chart is showing the probability of at least one date with mutual interest. And it's comparing the model's performance, which is this purple solid line up here, to the dotted gray line, which is representing the base rate. And I'll explain what this base rate is first. So if you imagine taking a random man and a random woman and pairing them up on a date, the likelihood that there's going to be mutual interest at the end of that date is 12%. And what the dotted gray line is showing you is that assuming every date is independent, if you keep making these random pairings and this person is going on more than one date, the probability of at least one of those dates being successful, of one of those dates having mutual interest, is going to be increasing, right? Assuming each one is independent. And so that's why you see that up and to the right relationship. But what if instead of doing this random pairing, you use the model to select a date for this person that it ranks in the top 5th percentile of scores. So you're now being selective about who you choose, and you're using the model's scores to make the selection. Well, then the probability of mutual interest from a first date jumps up to 45%. And just as another point of, so this is a 4x increase in the, roughly a 4x increase in the probability of a successful date as compared to random chance. Just for another point of comparison here, I won't mention them by name, but one of the most well-known nationwide matchmakers in the United States, which, these matchmakers charge thousands and thousands of dollars for their services. They're very cagey about their metrics, basically because they do not a great job. And if you look at their data, you can try to figure out like what's their performance that would be equivalent to this kind of metric I'm showing you guys here. And in the most optimistic case, it's 35%. So my little hacky toy thing from the speed dating thing is outperforming the most well-known nationwide matchmaker. And I think this is basically just because it's difficult to scale human matchmaking. Scaling human intuition is kind of difficult. Okay, so what were the most important features out of the model? There are 118 total. What are the features in this model that are most predictive of whether or not there's going to be mutual interest between a man and a woman? So this is a chart showing the top 10 features in this random forest model in descending order of importance. And they're color-coded by category here. So the blue ones are personality-related features. The kind of pink one are attractiveness-related features. And I'll just make 2 quick observations here. So out of these top 10 features, 8 of them are assortative mating features. And you can tell because there's a suffix _ diff. Those are all those assortative mating features, which are trying to capture the difference or the similarity between the man and the woman on the date. And then the single most important feature in the model is the difference between the man and the woman's physical attractiveness ratings. But what I thought was interesting is that coming in a very close second is this difference in neuroticism. And neuroticism, again, is this inverse of emotional stability. It's this tendency to feel anxiety and depression. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Are those positive or negative marks?
Let's do questions at the end if that's okay. So this is a hacky kind of prototype model. In the grand scheme of things, it's trained on a very small amount of data. There's many ways you can think about improving it. Some ideas of like interesting data you could collect that would be interesting to see how it would perform. You could try to capture these intangibles. Is it possible to capture these wispy qualities like communication ability, sense of humor, vibes, the attractiveness of someone's voice? My 100-question compatibility survey was all self-reported data, right? And self-reported data can be unreliable. So how would you handle exaggeration or dishonesty? I also didn't include any education. I didn't collect any education data. And then in terms of the outcomes, if you imagine relationships like almost like a marketing funnel, the outcomes I'm capturing are very shallow in that funnel. It's just a first date, a very short first date kind of outcome. And it would be interesting to capture outcomes deeper into that funnel. So is the couple still dating after 3 months? Did they get married? How happy are they with their relationship? So that's a little bit about building a compatibility model. I use this compatibility model to build this automated matchmaking service, and I'll talk a little bit about how that works. So the first 2 steps here are very similar to what I've already talked about before. First step is person creates their account, they complete their compatibility survey, upload their photos. From this data, you extract features, you get their photos rated, you distill all these features into a comprehensive set of attributes and preferences. The next step here is for any given person that's interested in getting set up, you compute the set of all possible dates they could be going on. And what I mean by possible dates is it's dates that they haven't been on, but they could be going on. And for each one of these pairings, you use your romantic compatibility model to estimate the likelihood of mutual interest for each one of these possible dates. So it's spitting out a probability of mutual interest for each one of these pairings. The next step here was around eligibility. And basically the thinking here was I didn't want I did not. I restricted. I did not allow everyone to purchase a matchmaking package. I only wanted to allow a subset of people to purchase a matchmaking package, and only if I felt that I had reasonable confidence and reasonable evidence that that it would be worth their time and money to go on a date with someone that I set them up with. And so this is kind of how that eligibility process worked. So first, you start with this universe of all possible dates that person could go on, and you progressively start applying different filters. And if at the end of that filtering process, you're left with a reasonable number of quality dates, then they would be allowed to purchase a date. Otherwise, they would be put on a wait list. So the first set of filters here were these heuristic-based filters. People, generally speaking, have these hard constraints in terms of who they're willing to date. They usually are not interested in like a long distance relationship, so there's hard filters on location. Most people have age criteria, right? A chart that I showed previously was saying that 70% of people care about politics, at least in 2021, 2022. And so some people are just incompatible politically. Filter people out by height as well. So first you start with that set of possible dates, you use these hard constraints and filter people out. Then you apply these statistics-based constraints where you filter out people if their probability of mutual interest is below a threshold. And if at the end of that whole process, there's still a minimum number of quality dates, then you allow that person to purchase a matchmaking package. And then finally, if they purchase a package, you help arrange a date for them. And so the way this works is you start going down that list of, in descending order by probability of mutual interest, reaching out to that person, asking, hey, are you interested in being set up on this date with this person? If they say yes, that's great. You set them up on the date. If not, you move on to the next person in the list. Okay, so how did it go? So I was running a trial in Austin, Texas, where I was charging $129 to be set up on a single date. And at the end of this whole eligibility process for this trial, there were 25 people that were eligible that I felt like, okay, I feel like I have some confidence in being able to set you up on someone where there's a reasonable chance you guys would get along. Out of those 25 people, one person, in this case, a guy, ended up purchasing it, so 4% conversion there. So I started trying to set this guy up on a date, and I started reaching out to the women that could be compatible with him. And I'm getting two flavors of responses. One is no response at all. The second response is, oh man, I feel bad. I signed up for your app, 9 months ago or 6 months ago. I'm now in a new relationship, no longer interested. So very disappointing, was not able to set this guy up on a match, and I had to refund him for his purchase. So a little bit disappointing. There's lots of things you could think about that I could improve, right? The model could be more accurate. The design of the app could be better. The level of service could be better. There's millions of things that could have been better. But ultimately, I did not fail because of the tech or the product or the design. I failed because of distribution. Even if you have a perfectly accurate and omniscient matchmaking model, it's not super useful if a customer soulmate is not an active and engaged user on your service. And so just to illustrate this point of distribution, if you're thinking about maybe building a matchmaking service or a dating service like this, it's useful to go through this thought experiment, which is how many users do you need to have high confidence of setting up one successful date? So let's say a woman comes to you, she's interested in being set up on a date, and there's all these guys that are within like a 30-mile radius, which is the maximum she's willing to date within. And again, this is just a thought experiment. These are just back of the envelope numbers. You can plug in your own here. This is just for illustration. But immediately there's all these hard constraints, and we're going to filter out 30% of the people. So 70% of these guys are left, right? You filter them out because of political mismatches or age or height. Then you score the remaining guys with your compatibility model, right? And you're going to filter out 95% of these people because we only want really high quality matches. But you can plug in your own numbers here, right? Then you're left with these guys here who, in theory, could be good people to go on a date with. And so you start reaching out to them. Hey, do you want to be set up with this woman? But for all sorts of reasons, 80% of them are not going to show up. They may have gotten super busy with work. They may have moved cities. They may have signed up 9 months ago. Now they're in a new relationship, right? And then we know from the model, there's like basically a coin flip as to whether there's going to be mutual interest. So finally, okay, this is the guy that there was some connection with after that first date. So if you plug in all these numbers, feel free to plug in your own. The takeaway here is that you need at minimum hundreds of customers, hundreds of members of the opposite sex within any certain radius of a person that might be interested in your service. So this was not entirely surprised. The fact that distribution is the overwhelming reason for the graveyard of dating startups, it's not a closely guarded secret. I had known all this going in, and yet it was too easy to get distracted. Instead of obsessively focusing on the most critical element for a successful dating service, my attention drifted to all sorts of different places. And while I abstractly understood that those were mistakes at the time, I grasped their significance in a much more visceral and palpable way after going through this. So if you're interested in doing something like this, if you're interested in starting a dating app or a matchmaking service, it's worth, I guess this would be my TLDR for you, which is it's comparatively very easy to figure out why existing dating services are not great and how they could be improved. Everyone and their mom and their dog has an idea for a dating app, but it is comparatively much more difficult to figure out how to efficiently acquire a dense local network of active and engaged users. And it seems to me that until you have a clear solution to that existential challenge, any investment into a new dating service seems a bit misguided if your goal is to build a successful business. I still think this is a problem worth solving because choosing a spouse is arguably the most important decision one ever makes. If you think about how much money and time people spend on their choice of where they go to college, there's so much anxiety for many people around this in high school. People, the sticker price for many universities is $60K right now, right? People will invest $250,000 into where they're going to school. People will uproot their lives and their family's lives to move cities for the sake of a career or a job. But arguably, the person that you choose to marry is more important than the university you went to or any given job. So I think this is a problem we're solving. I was not able to be successful here. I think someone will be, and I think that within the next 20 years, someone will figure this out, and the majority of marriages are going to be arranged by AI. This is a QR code that will take you to all the links and the data that I talk about. I'm happy to answer any questions as well.